99% of we LDS people too, because we don't bother to learn them either. But after learning everything we can about them, and there's multitudinous millions of pages in print on them, it'll take us more than a lifetime simply to do that one-step process. No critic has ever come close to that. But after doing that, he suggests one then learns to think Egyptian by imagining to oneself how Egyptians would react, taking care to be sensible to the finest nuances of the text. And who among the anti-Mormons studies the pyramid texts to find those finest nuances of the text? Who among the anti-Mormon critics studies the coffin texts, the book of the going forth by day, the breathing texts? Who among you anti-Mormon critics has even bothered to read this text? Just one serious scholarly attempt at understanding the Egyptians. It's only 600 pages. After you're done with Nibley's text, you only have about 1.5 million more volumes to go through, and that's not even counting the scholarly journals. Have you ever seen the Egyptian materials in the BYU library? I have. It goes for shelf after shelf after shelf, and every shelf has hundreds of books on them. Who among us, I include myself here, who among us has bothered to read all of that yet? Absolutely none of us. All we do is we quote an authority here, or we quote an authority there, to confirm our own bias either for or against Joseph Smith. And that's where that's where we're at. In other words, none of us knows very much. You critics don't have the final answers. We Mormons don't either. We're not claiming we do. We're saying the door is still open, and there's still an enormous amount to learn before we can make a final judgment. So was Joseph Smith wrong? No. Is Joseph Smith right? We don't know yet. The critics will say no. The Mormons say, well, we don't know yet. Well, if anything cannot be acquired by study, it is an infinite naivete, as the Egyptologists are calling for. The only way one becomes an Egyptologist in this world is not to shed one's own intellectual habits, but it is to conform to all things to the most convenient and regimented forms of departmental behavior on earth. In other words, the Egyptologists have their bias just as badly as the anti-Mormons do, just as badly as the Mormons. And if the anti-Mormons can quote an Egyptologist here or an Egyptologist there who has found a negative conclusion against Joseph Smith, that proves absolutely nothing. Fascinating, isn't it? Anyway, Ehrman said for half a century. Now this is Adolf Ehrman. He was really quite a prominent Egyptologist in his day. Here's what he said. He said for half of a century. Now get this. He spent 50 years studying this stuff. 50 years. More years than I am old. Right now. I'm only 49. Adolf Ehrman said after 50 years, I have wrestled with it, and how little certainty has come out of it all. He didn't know a thing after 50 years of research. Now, that should give you anti-Mormon critics something to think about. If one of the greatest Egyptologists couldn't get anything out of it for 50 years study, how come you're crowing that you know the answers when you don't even study the stuff? Everyone still invents his own Egyptian religion, based on his own biases and knowledge, which is next to nothing. One might say that whatever we come up with is wrong. Now this is the Egyptologist speaking. He says, whatever we come up with is wrong in the Egyptian religion because the task is simply insoluble. I have never been able to escape from this verdict. And he spent 50 years of his life on it. How come you anti-Mormon critics are so certain? You see. Santayana notes that the Vorter book gives 37 different terms for heaven. 37 different terms from the Wörterbook, whose nuances are left to the translator to use according to his own lights. So elaborate instructions in the Book of the Dead, referring to the soul's celestial voyage, translate into mystical talk, and it must be treated as holy mumbo-jumbo. And that's the Egyptologist's attitude. We don't know what it means, therefore it's mumbo-jumbo. What a canard! What a cop-out! If our ignorance doesn't give us the proper understanding and meaning, do we have the right to call it holy mumbo-jumbo and throw it out as if it's meaningless? Such bias of the Egyptologists. And these are the same Egyptologists that the anti-Mormon critics say prove Joseph Smith was false. How on earth can that be when they say themselves they haven't got a clue? That's utterly beyond me. You see, the anti-Mormon critics aren't so solid in their knowledge as they love to pretend they are. So the rest of we LDS, we can kind of relax a little bit and realize that there's more work being done and we have to start keeping track of it. But final pronouncements against Joseph Smith is simply ludicrous. It makes no sense. It's naive in and of itself. That's the message. That's the message. To this day, no Egyptologist can do anything more than pretend to understand the Book of Breathings or the facsimiles of the Book of Abraham. Though by departmental courtesy we grant them with the knowledge that they do not possess, it is safe to say that Egyptologists are still without a foothold in reality. And they themselves say so. Those who don't say so are kidding themselves. That's why new translations of the Egyptian materials continue to come out, and they're different from the former translations. New knowledge is constantly being reassessed, and it changes what we say we know the truth is. We don't know anything near that yet. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the game. Until we come to understand this, we're never going to grasp why, when an anti-Mormon critic will quote an Egyptologist or two or three or four, why that doesn't destroy Joseph Smith and Mormonism is very simple. Because none of them know the truth. Yet, we're still working on that. So it's not an open and shut case against Joseph Smith, as the anti-Mormons love to pretend it is. They're simply naive and wrong. They're ill-informed. None of them study the Egyptian religion anyway. So why would you accept what they say? Oh, well, I quote an authority. Well, the authorities are saying, hey, this is all guesswork for us. It's based on our own naive intuition. That's hardly a scientific basis. Anyway, Bruno Stricker, in a special reference to the Book of Breathings, which our Joseph Smith is a part of, here's what he says about him. The text is so pregnant that well nigh every word, whether substantive, verb, or even a preposition, possesses a hidden content. So the mere business of translating under such circumstances becomes virtually impossible. A translation can here be nothing more than a caricature. And that's what the world's foremost Egyptological scholar said about the Book of Breathings, which our Joseph Smith Papyri is. Now, with the foremost world's authority saying that about the kind of text that Joseph Smith Papyri are, the critics haven't got a clue. They don't have a leg to stand on when they say, well, Joseph Smith couldn't translate anything. Neither can any of the scholars. And they're pronouncing Joseph Smith wrong based on such a flimsy foundation? Now, there's a lot more to this than the anti-Mormon critics will ever let you know. That's the message. That's the excitement. We can live by faith. We can continue to believe, and it's not going against the scholarship, because the scholarship doesn't know what it's doing yet either.